This is
Three.
this is tape number 3, interview with Mr. Warren Zorek. Okay, you were talking about your passage to the United States.
Yes, it was very enjoyable, since there were only young people on board ship, and we had a very good time. And when I landed here, I started working in a tobacco factory, but it belonged to a second cousin of mine. I worked there for quite a number of years. They also had a cigarette a retail store, and they sold the business first to a company in St. Louis, and at that time I had set up the laboratory here to test the nicotine in cigarettes, and I'd been trained to do that. So when they sold the factory to the company in St. Louis, they asked me to go out there and set the same operation up for them. So I went out to St. Louis for about 6 months and set up the place out there, and came back here to New York, and I don't think I'd been back here for about a few months when the factory in St. Louis was sold to a company in Richmond, Virginia, and the name of Laros and Brother Company. They were quite a large factory, manufacturer of Edgeworth pipe tobacco, which was very well known, and so they asked me to go down there and set the operation up for them in Richmond. So I went to Richmond, Virginia, and spent about, I guess, 4 or 5 months down in Richmond, setting up the operation there, and then came back to New York, where I worked in the retail store, which was on 42nd Street for some time. And by that time, I met the lady who was later to become my wife, and I decided before that I would make a change in the other operation. Was a family-owned business which consists of a retail store, and I really didn't think there was much to do there. There was no more factory. So I decided I would make a change, and I found a job at Bloomingdale's in their training squad. And I joined Bloomingdale's about 3 or 4 weeks before I got married.
How did you meet your wife?
Well, that's a very good question you ask. I went out with 2 good friends of mine. On their first anniversary, I took them out to dinner, and I had a date that night. And the young lady that was with me said she was not staying home that weekend because she was staying with a friend of hers, since her friend's parents were away, and her friend's apartment was air-conditioned, and this was the summer, and she was staying there, so instead of taking her home, I should take her to her friend's apartment. I took her to her friend's apartment, and I met, her friend came out to meet me, and I decided I would call her friend for a date the next night. So I called the couple that I had taken out for dinner and who had asked me for dinner the following week. I said, would you mind inviting Jane for dinner as my date? They were going to get me another date. And she said no, and she called up Jane and said, would you like to come to dinner at our house? You met Warren yesterday, or rather, I tell you my nickname, as everybody calls me, is Winnie. And so I said, would she be my date? And she said yes. And so then I called her up and said, I hear we're going out for dinner next Friday. How would you like to meet me for lunch on Monday? So we had lunch on Monday, and we went out on Tuesday, we went out on Wednesday, and about 4 weeks later, 3 or 4 weeks later, we became engaged. And a year later, following June, we were married. And that's how I started my new family over here.
And where were you living at the time?
At the time I was living on Riverside Drive, and my wife was living just in the building in the next building from here, where she grew up. So we're just a block away from where she grew up. Her mother still lives in that building.
And you two had some children together.
Yes, we have 2 wonderful children. I have a daughter named Jennifer. She was the first one, and she grew up in New York, and she is now married, and she has her own business. She's a sales representative for luggage, in the luggage business and luggage cards. And my son, who was born 2 years after Jennifer, went to Kenyon College and became an actor. He's an aspiring actor in California. And he came back after college, and he decided to go out to California, and he was very fortunate, maybe too fortunate. Within 2 weeks after going out, he got a job in a movie. And after that, he got another movie, and he was very, very fortunate. And he's been in a number of bit parts, and he loves it, loves being out there, he enjoys it.
And you, how else have you spent your time?
Well, I spent my time, I became very much involved with the American Red Cross in New York. You're going to ask me how. When I met my wife first, she told me that if a man comes home with a fireman's uniform, that's going to be her father. And I couldn't quite figure out what her father was doing in a fireman's uniform. She explained to me that during the war, when there was a shortage of firemen, her father, who was unable to go into the service because of a spinal injury he had, decided he would be a volunteer fireman. It's something he always wanted to do. And so in the evenings, he used to go to the firehouse and act as a volunteer. When the war was over and they no longer needed volunteer firemen, he used to go there once a week, probably just to play cards, but also if there was anything happened, they would let him ride along on the engine. So when what they did at that point, they decided to get together these volunteer firemen, and they would man the fire department canteen that would go to major fires. But with the money crunch in the city of New York, the fire department canteen was one of the first things to go. So this group of volunteers then decided they would go out on their own with 3 or 4 gallon cans of hot or cold drinks, depending on the type of weather it was, and take care of the firemen. So that wasn't very practical. So then they joined forces with the American Red Cross and decided they would man their canteen. And that's what he was doing at the time. And I could never understand at the time how he used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to a fire and then go to work the next day. And I thought that was kind of crazy. But Jane also wanted to go to fires, but her father always felt that ladies don't go to fires. So I used to take her along, and she would go with me, and she would say, well, her father would be very happy if I took her along. So one of the first holidays, they bought me a fire radio under the guise that it would be nice for her father to be able to listen to a fire radio if he came to visit our house. And because I really wasn't very interested in listening to this. But one day there was an aborted takeoff at Kennedy Airport, and the plane had to come back and land. And I started listening to this, and it was really very, very exciting. Plane had to circle and then land, and they had to put foam on the runway, and it really sounded exciting. So I started listening to the fire radio. And then I went to a few fires with my father-in-law, and it seemed quite interesting. And then I joined the group of volunteers he belonged to, and eventually became the president of that group, and became active, very active at the same time in the American Red Cross. And where the main purpose was not just feeding firemen, but also to take care of the victims from fires who were burned out, because in the 60s, in the 50s, I guess in the 60s, when really the fires were very prevalent in New York, when you had a lot of fires in New York, the fire department was too busy to do anything with the people that were burned out. They would put out the fire and leave the people standing in the street. They had no choice. That was not their job. So the American Red Cross would have to take care of those people, and that's the job I became involved in as a volunteer. And in the 70s, I became volunteer disaster chairman for the American Red Cross in New York, a position which I've continued to hold. And I've done many functions in the Red Cross, and at the same time working for Bloomingdale's, also in many different jobs. And I've traveled for Bloomingdale's all over the world, over Europe, as a buyer in merchandising and operations. And at that time, when there were many major disasters for the Red Cross, where they would send volunteers out of the city, I would go and take part of my vacation time to do that. I went to Hurricane Andrew, I went to the California earthquake, I went to the floods in St. Louis, went to the floods upstate New York. I just came back in January from the floods in San Francisco. But then, of course, in New York, we have so many disasters on a daily basis. We have fires. The Red Cross in New York responds to more than 10 fires a day on an average daily basis. Then we've had subway derailments. We've had a number of airplane crashes to which I've gone to. There was the Avianca crash in Long Island. And we've had the Happy Land disaster, where 84 people died in the Bronx in a fire. I spent about a week on that. Then we've had the World Trade Center explosion. Spent about a week there. And we take care of the people. Happy Land fire, for example, we worked for a week taking care of all the relatives that needed assistance with handling the burial. And even not just the burial, but we had to charter a plane to take 48 of the bodies back to Honduras. And the following year, the president from Honduras came and presented the Red Cross with a beautiful sash and a medal for the work we did. And I get a lot of satisfaction being able to help people, and that's why about a year and a half ago, I decided to retire from my job at Bloomingdale's and devote more time to the people that are less fortunate than I have been, because, as we've discussed, I think my life has been very, very fortunate, and I think I should pass some of that on to those people that need it more.
What do you attribute that fortune to?
I think I attribute it to the way I've looked at life. A lot of people walk around and feel what has happened to them. They have to get revenge. They have to try and they hate people. They can't. I've known people that say, "I'll never go to Germany because of what happened." If I could change things by not going to Germany or by not talking to people about it, it would be one thing. But since I can't change anything, the best thing to do is to get on with my life and do the best I can for other people and for myself. I think because of that, I think I've had a better life, and I've been able to give some of it to other people.
Can you tell us something about the Holocaust tracing?
Yes. As you know, the American Red Cross, or every Red Cross unit, does tracing of people who've become separated either through disasters, natural disasters, or through the Holocaust or any other war or anything like that. And this has gone on for 125 years. But about 4 years ago, the Red Cross realized that time was beginning to run out for the victims of the Holocaust. So they set up a special Holocaust and War Victims Tracing Center with headquarters in Baltimore, which works directly with the Depository for Information, which is in Arlsen in Germany, where they have 35 million documents covering about 13 million people from the Holocaust. Now you say 35 million documents. The reason for that is that there are many documents for one person. One person was moved from one camp to another. There were different new forms made out, so that's why you have so many more documents. And this tracing became very, very active, received a lot of publicity, and this really is our main function, is to get the information out to the people that should know about it, because a lot of people aren't aware that they're doing this. And in the 4 years or so, we've reunited about 108 people, couples, families, if you want to call it that. And I've seen some of it happen, and believe me, every bit of it is worthwhile. I'll tell you, just to give you one story, which is about a family who lived north of Warsaw during the war, a Catholic family consisting of mother and father and 3 children. The boy at the time was 16, the girl was 5, and the boy was 4. And a German soldier was killed, and nobody would admit to having killed him. So the Germans took all males 16 years and older and shot them. So that left the woman a widow with the 2 children, 2 young children, 5 and 4. A year later, the mother had a heart attack and died, and that left the 2 children as orphans. They became separated eventually, but the boy was sent to an orphanage in Richmond, Virginia, and he knew his sister was alive somewhere, but he didn't know where. And he married and has a family, but he never really became assimilated. So he never did anything about trying to find his sister. He had pictures of his sister and he knew about it. Eventually, as he settled down, he met his next door neighbor, was a man that worked for the Department of State of Virginia. And he told him about his life story. And the man said to him, well, why don't you contact the American Red Cross? They might be able to help you. And he helped him filling in the forms, which are somewhat cumbersome. And they were sent eventually to Baltimore, where a caseworker works on them. And they found out from the orphanage in Poland, now that we have access to the Polish Red Cross, they found out that some of the children had been sent to, obviously, Richmond, which we know, and some of the children were sent to Australia. They contacted the Australian Red Cross and located the sister. And I guess it was about a year or so ago where the sister came to Richmond and was reunited with her brother, and I met them. And believe me, there were cameramen there, and there wasn't a dry eye in any of them. It was quite an event. And then we had several instances in New York where people were reunited. We had a brother and a sister who was the brother lived in New York and the sister lived in the Ukraine, and he also knew she was alive, but he had written to her and she never responded, because when under the Soviet regime, I guess it was not very good to have relatives or friends in the United States, so she never admitted to it. And when this was over, the Red Cross found his sister, and she came over here, and they were reunited here in New York. And we had another instance where family was looking for their uncle, and at the same time, the other part of the family was also looking for their uncle, and they happened, the same information came to the one person at the same time, and they thought that was rather coincidental. So they contacted the two parties that had called, that had written in, and they found out they were cousins living 10 miles apart in New York and never knew each one existed. But then I have my own story about finding people. I went to Hurricane Andrew in Florida in 1989 or whatever year it was, and I had my name tag on, Warren Zorak, and I registered with the Red Cross that I was there, and I thought it was me. And somebody came over to me and said, "We have somebody here with the same name." Now that's sort of unusual because my name is not a very common name. And I said, "I'd like to speak to the gentleman." And I went over to him and I covered up my name. And I said to him, "You've caused me a lot of problems lately." And he said, "Why is that?" And I took my hand away and he looked at it. He says, "Where did you get that?" I told him that my father gave that to me a long time ago. And he looked at it again and he said, "Oh, you spell yours without the E. Zork is his name." And I said, "Yes." I said, "My father had some relatives in Chicago." And he said, "Oh, you mean David Zork in the antique business, who was related to his father also." So this man was born in St. Louis. His name is Warren Zork. He married. He became Seventh-day Adventist. He went to Africa as a missionary until his children were grown up. And he's living in Virginia now. And we've met him and we've met his wife. And they're wonderful people. And he's also a volunteer for the American Red Cross. So it pays to do that, to find your own family. This is a man I never knew existed. And obviously we're related. I don't quite know how, but we're related somehow.
Did you ever get any news about your parents or sister?
The only news I received is from the lady that worked for my parents. And she said, she wrote to me that they were sent to Auschwitz. And I'm planning later on this year to take my family to Europe because my children want to see where I was born, and I want to go to Arleston. Since I'm involved with the tracing center, I will want to go to Arleston and see if they can give me any information, which would just be the closure, which would be good to get.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any message you'd like to pass on?
No, the only message I would like to pass on is that I think if everybody would go about helping other people, I think they're going to be better off because of it, and I think they'll lead a better life, and to have other people being grateful to you that you can do something for them is worth every bit of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I say how I got these?
Oh yeah.
Okay, we're rolling. Okay.
This is a picture of my grandfather. His name is Gustav Zorak, and we've received a lot of information about the history of my family from a gentleman living in Warren, Pennsylvania, Mr. Ball, who has made it his business to trace his family, which is the Ball family, and the Zorak family, who are interrelated. And he received a copy of this picture of my grandfather, Gustav Zorak.
Okay. Okay.
And this would be a picture of my grandmother, whose name was Rosalie Ball Zorak. And she's related, of course, to the Ball family. Her maiden name was Ball, and then she married my grandfather. This is a picture of my mother, myself, and my father outside their store. I have a scooter, which I remember quite well. And this picture was taken, according to the note on the back, in 1931. So I was 6 years old. This is a picture of my father, Alfred Zorek, taken in 1936 during a vacation or a walking trip in the mountains of what in those days was Czechoslovakia. And this is a picture of myself, also on the same walking trip in the mountains of Czechoslovakia, taken in 1936. This is a picture of the house I lived in Breslau. This was taken in, I believe, 1989, and when I visited there with my wife. And the town now is part of Poland, and it's called Wrocław. This is the picture of the family I live with. On the left is Jim Thew, my very best, my dear friend, his father, and Mr. Thew, and his mother, Mrs. Thew. This is a picture of the family I live with. On the left is my very best and dear friend, Jim Thew. In the middle is his father, Tom Thew, and on the right-hand side is his mother, Mrs. Thew, and this was taken in Gloucester about 1945, 1946. Looks like we've been shoveling snow. This is a picture of me working for the American Red Cross during the floods in St. Louis. There was no room in the front of the truck when we were moving food for mass care, and I had to sit in the back of the truck, and someone took this picture. This picture was taken on the occasion of my daughter's wedding in September of '93. On the right-hand side is my wife, Jane Papa Zorek. Standing behind her is my son, Michael Zorek. Next to him is my brother-in-law, John Papa. And next to him is my son-in-law, Mark Pressman. Then there's my daughter, Jennifer Lynn Zorek. And I'm next to my daughter, and in front of my daughter is my mother-in-law, Helen Klaas Papa.